Good morning, everyone. I'm Margarita White with the Community Foundation of Noble County. And today we are going to start our next and final series for this virtual workshop series with the grant writing portion of it. Today, we're going to talk about grant research. Just keep in mind that after the meeting, you'll get the recording and you'll get a survey to help us to evaluate our programming. And so today we have with us Eric Hessel, Vice President of Programs from the Hendricks County Community Foundation. And so I'm going to turn it over to Eric because he has a lot of good information for us today. So Eric, take it away.
Thanks for having me, Margarita. Hi, everybody. As Margarita said, I'm the Vice President of Programs from the Hendricks County Community Foundation. We are just west of Indianapolis. So we're the kind of suburban county outside of Indianapolis. I always tell folks, if you've landed at the airport, you have been in Hendricks County. So parts of the airport are in Hendricks County. So that's a good gauge of whether you've been there or not. I'm going to start sharing my screen, which we did practice, but we never ceases to amaze the issues that come up. I do want to let you all know that I am pretty easygoing. If you got a question, pop in, type it in the chat. You can unmute yourself and yell over me. Whatever works for you works for me. I'm here to give you as much information as I can, and then and we can interact over that. Okay. So today we are starting with. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am and why Margarita asked me to be here. And then we're going to cover these kind of 5 sections, but not all today. It is 9 in the morning and we're not going to get to all 5 of these today. What's going to sound scary is we're going to hit the first one today. We're going to get to grant basics. And then there's a lot of information in there. And really it's to prepare you for the next step. Like if I was coaching somebody through grant writing, this is where I'd have them start. We'll get you all the way to that point. And then the next time we meet, we are going to knock through the writing, the finding, the writing, working with foundations, and what you do after you get the grant, because eventually you will get a grant, right? Like it will happen. So that's kind of our model. And so if you are kind of a very organized, by the time person, and you get nervous that we're stuck on slide 1, that's normal. And that's the way we're going to work through this process with you all. So a little bit about me. I told you I'm the Vice President of Programs at the Hendricks County Community Foundation. I've been doing grant making for 18 years, which sounds kind of crazy. That is more than half of my life. I started on a youth council, a youth grant making council. Margarita and Abby and Sarah and I were kind of talking about Margarita's council right before you all joined in here. And so I started that in 2003. And so I have been reviewing grants basically nonstop for 18 years. So among the Community Foundation, both as a youth council and as the program officer and vice president of programs. But I've also sat on the Indiana Arts Commission grant review program, as well as the Indiana Historical Society's grant review program. And somebody in the room is surely going, wait, you just review grants? Like, hold on, how does that make you good at grant writing? Well, I get to see all the things that people complain about when you're grant writing, right? The issues that come up, the trick spots, the things that folks don't quite understand when they're filling it out. And so it actually gives you a great opportunity to kind of see the other side. I always recommend folks, if you have an opportunity, I think, to be a great grant writer, one of the best things you can do is sit on a grant review committee. So one that you probably aren't going to apply for, right? So, you don't need that conflict of interest, but the Indiana Arts Commission, I think, is always looking for grant reviewers, and they do have kind of these regional committees. The Historical Society was another great one, but find a local foundation that maybe is not meeting your organization's needs and see if they need a volunteer, because it's a great, great learning opportunity. And I do think it can make you a better grant writer. So with that, I'm going to get started with a little bit of numbers. I'm not the numbers guy. So when we start talking about finances and budget, and I start saying 2 + 2 is 4, like that is the extent of my budgeting. Okay. Yours is going to be much more complex, but mine is simple numbers. But I love to start with putting some grant making in context. And this graphic is from Giving USA. This is out of Indianapolis from the School of Philanthropy. It's updated every year. And what we like to highlight is that, everybody goes apply, 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 apply for more grants. That's what you need to do to fund your programming. And this graphic shows that almost 70% of charitable dollars are coming from individuals. So individuals are giving their dollars to organizations. Then 20% is foundations, right? And then if you look just below that, it's 9%, 10%, see how I round my numbers? 10% is bequests. Well, I mean, this is a little dark, but bequests are dead individuals, right? So if you combine those two, individuals are making almost 80% of the charitable giving that happens in your community. And then just so you can remind your board when they say, go knock on every business's door to get their money, here's a reminder that only 4% of giving is done by corporations. Only 4%. So I always remind folks that businesses are in the business of making money, not giving it away, unlike foundations and individuals who have a charitable heart. And so keep that in mind. This is good context for when your board asks you to do things that you're like, no, they just don't give like that. Now, this is good data, but I will give you a little note because I use this information a lot. I am a diehard follower of the blog Nonprofit AF, if anybody has heard of it. Great, just thought pieces, particularly on diversity and equity and nonprofit and charitable giving. They literally just posted, I think it was last week, an article that said, foundations stop telling people that 80% of giving comes from individuals. So I read it because I say it a lot. I took offense to it. And then I'm like, okay, it's good information. They caught me in my blind spot. So I want to give you a couple data points from that, just to let you know that this is not like the end all be all information. So in that article, they quoted between 16 and 36% of giving comes from individuals if you remove large nonprofits, including universities, hospitals, and religious institutions. That's a whole different picture, right? That means that foundations are making up a bigger percentage of the giving for smaller nonprofits. And particularly organizations led by marginalized communities are even more reliant on foundation support. So I can't give you this data and not say that there's also another side to it, right? This was my end all be all quotes. And then this data came out and I'm like, okay, like let's add some more information to this presentation. And then this is not pertinent for here, but there's no great place to put it. I always get the question, I want to hire a grant writer. Like, should I hire like a grant writer, a contract grant writer? And here are a couple tips. There is no reason, it may be perfectly appropriate for your organization to hire a grant writer, to contract a grant writer. However, one thing that always comes up is don't pay them a percentage of what they receive, right? They should be a contractor meaning you're paying for their time. If any of you have applied for a grant, you realize that you don't always get the grant, even if you have a really, really amazing grant application, right? So you could do a lot of work and still not receive a grant. And so you should be paying for their time. It's considered unethical to pay them a percentage of what you raise. And that is from the Association of Fundraising Professionals. Don't select a grant writer based on their fees alone. As always, you can get what you pay for. Sometimes people are like, oh, we'll just have all of our volunteers write all of our grants. Well, that may be appropriate for your organization, but you may get what you paid for. As always, don't expect 100% approval. That you all know that because you've probably written at least one grant in your life. And you know that it doesn't always work out the way you want it, maybe not even for any fault of your own. And then don't expect a fast turnaround. Don't expect fast money because there are timelines, and both on the foundation and on your own organization. And so just you cannot expect that fast turnaround. So there's no great place to put that conversation, but just a good context, because I get that call all the time at our foundation. Who should we hire to be our grant writer? And we're like, well, let's talk a lot more about what that could look like. Okay, I told you we were going to hit grant basics hard. And this is going to lead, this is all your prep work. This is the conversations you need to think about before you even head to Google and type in who's giving grants, right? Like way before you do that, we really want to talk about some of these grant basics. So very simple definition of grant. I think you probably all signed up because you at least have a concept of grants. And let's talk about the types of grants that are out there, right? So I really divide this into two sections: the type of funder, right? Who's making the grants and what type of grants they're offering. So when it comes to funders, right, we have like the federal and state. These are big grants. They're not easy to get. They require so much paperwork. Anytime I talk to a nonprofit that gets federal or state funding, it is like a full-time job, right? They're typically bigger organizations meeting really, really high standards. It's not usually the new folks in town, right? So your federal and state funders are going to require a big application up front and a lot of reporting. And they often pay their grants as a reimbursement. So you have to do the work before you get paid. And it's really valuable to know that, because if you're going to get a grant like that, you have to be able to float until you get that reimbursement paid to you. There's some corporate foundations, right? Corporate and private foundations tend to work very similarly. They all have to pay out their 5%, like written into the law, basically. And they're going to have really, really specific goals, right? So they typically trickle down from the corporation, even though they're a separate entity typically, but they have really set goals, and usually where their service area is, right? So I'm thinking of Finish Line, and they do a bunch of giving in Marion County and kind of on that northwest side of Marion County, because that's where their headquarters are. And it will not shock you to know that their focus is on youth, right? Because they want kids to wear sneakers. And they often build basketball courts and support YMCAs and Boys and Girls Clubs. And then you've got your private foundations, big and small, right? We're talking all the way, you could imagine like a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? Largest in the country. Number 2 is, anybody have a guess? I know everybody's on mute and I can't see the chat. Lilly Endowment. Yeah. Lilly Endowment, number 2 largest foundation in the country. But they go all the way down to small family foundations, right? That are just balance the line between maybe a donor advised fund at a community foundation and their own entity, but they're their own entity, right? So there's that real, they could be very small and they're going to have all types of different focus areas, typically depending on what the family cares about. And the further we get away from whoever set up that foundation, the broader that reach can go. And then you have your lovely community foundations, woo woo, right, Margarita? We love our community foundations, and they do what I like to say, a little bit of everything. I always tell folks, if you've met one community foundation, you've met one community foundation. So it's a blessing and a curse when you serve maybe a region or 2 counties or 3 counties, and you're like, well, Margarita gave me a grant last year. Why isn't this other community foundation funding us? And you go, well, they have a whole different focus area, right? They're named the same, but they're doing sometimes totally different things. And their processes, all of them are going to be a little bit different, right? And so you really need to know who you're applying to and how to engage with them. You know, your community foundation is usually easily accessible, right? I think folks at DECO, I've heard great things about your response time, although I have not had to call Sarah, although she's still showing up, even though she should have had a baby a week ago. So I'm guessing she just won't leave work. So, you know, sometimes they're super easily accessible. I will tell you, it's probably not easy to get a call in to a program officer at Lilly Endowment, right? You know, every once in a while I have somebody tell me, well, I'm just going to call Lilly. And I'm like, okay, good luck. Like, well, sometimes I don't know their number, but good luck. And so think about all those different types of funders and how you might need to interact with them in a specific way. So then when we move to our types of grants, the conversation starts to fall on what are they interested in funding? Because a lot of times the number one piece is programs, right? It's the thing that you do. Now, your nonprofit may not have a lot of overhead. You may have no staff. Some of you are probably volunteers in this room. And programs are like that thing. My favorite example is there's a program in Indianapolis and it's cute. You might have one out here too. I saw somebody that looked like they're from an animal rescue. So they teach little kids to read by reading to shelter dogs. Like, you're like, tears, everybody loves it. It's kids, it's learning to read, it's cute animals. Like, this is the thing, right? So I always use that as an example because somebody finds something in it that they love, right? So the program, right, would be having those kids read to the dogs, right? Or cats. Maybe we've got cat people in the room. I'm a dog person. So most foundations I find tend to want to fund that kind of work, the program piece of your organization. But there are also operational grants, right? To fund, to make sure that you have a staff, the lights on, air conditioning, food for the dogs, like this kind of broad thing. I tend to find that that's not super common, but it's an upcoming trend. There's a lot of talk on the grant making side about trust-based philanthropy, multi-year unrestricted grants, really creating a partnership between funder and grantee. You may also find capital grants, right? We want to build a building, right? Not quite operational, but they want to build a building. And some foundations go, we want to help people build buildings. Or on a smaller scale, we, for a long time, were offering capital grants, but they were small capital grants. Nonprofits that needed a new computer, right? How many of you have a computer that you have to restart every day and a half because it jams up because you're working on Windows 95 with a little toaster floating across the screen? So think about, you know, if if a funder is offering capital grants, what is the capital that you might need to do your job better? Then there's also what we call like a planning or evaluation grants, right? So we know that this is a need in our community, but we need help figuring out how to get to the answer, right? A planning grant. So some funders are going to say, we do planning grants. You might also have evaluation, right? It's the other end of it, right? It's, we did all this work, but we need a system to evaluate our work. Now, most foundations, and we'll get to this a little bit, are going to in a little bit, but are going to ask you to be able to evaluate it anyway. So some folks may build in evaluations to their ask, right? So it will cost us, let's say the simplest form might be like a Survey Monkey. We survey all of the attendees to our program, you know, the last day, like the first day they come, the last day, 3 months later, 12 months later. And we would like $300, because I think that's the annual cost of Survey Monkey. $300, build that into your application, because, you know, this is, okay, sometimes I will tell you what I tell other foundations. Now, they don't always listen to me, but I say, if you're going to demand evaluation, maybe help them evaluate, help the grantee evaluate and pay for it. So not always taking me up on the offer, but I'm telling it, I'm preaching your side of this story in some of these meetings. And so be willing to ask for it. Now, as I kind of went through all of those, you could imagine, right, that your program and your operating and your capital and your planning and your evaluation actually aren't all separate silos, right? You could, in theory, track them all, most of them, as programmatic grants, because we have to plan our program, we have to run our program, we have to have staff. If we don't have a building and dog cages and books, we can't have a program, and we need to evaluate our program. So you can be thoughtful, and I'm not saying be tricky, but be thoughtful about your budget when you're presenting it and how that might look to a funder to know the full cost of your program, because you could not do that without all of those things. At least do it well. Any questions on types of grants? I will stop periodically because I run my mouth so fast when I get going. So I will take a break and a sip of water. Any questions?
If you have any questions, please unmute yourself and ask Eric.
Awesome. Well, I don't know if silence is a good thing or a bad thing, but we'll keep going.
Valuable information, Eric. Love it.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's talk about what the grant could look like, right? Just out of the bat. So some grant formatting. I don't know anybody personally that still uses paper. Okay. But they may, right? Some smaller foundations very well might have a paper application that you have to pick up at the library, for instance. Most folks have gone online. I think particularly after last year, the year that shall not be named, most people moved online no matter what. But understand that the way you interact with these forms are different. I would say typically paper forms have a lot more rules, right? We're talking, it has to be a certain margin size, right? Like 1-inch margins only. And we all know how we got around that in college, but like 1-inch margins. I was reading, as I was doing some research for this, I was reading something that said, you better measure your margins because you know the foundation will. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't even know where to find a ruler in my office, right? Like I couldn't get to a 1-inch ruler. So I'm not measuring it even if I said 1-inch margins, but apparently some funders are measuring the margins. But one of the pieces that's so important about this section is that you're really following their instructions, because especially on paper, it's like we want it one-sided. It needs to be paper clipped and not stapled. It needs to have your organization name at the top. It feels very like college, or at least when I went to college. I'm sure college is not like that anymore. Knock on wood. And online is going to be different. Here's my tip for online. This is not a text message to your friends. And so be really thoughtful about your grammar and punctuation and emojis. And I know that sounds crazy, but I will tell you, I have gotten grant applications that have ha in them, like they made a joke mid-sentence, or literally like a smiley emoji. And I'm like, one, how did you get that to do that in my grant application? And two, what? Smiley face? So just a quick reminder that like this is a professional piece. And so, be a little bit more thoughtful about how you're writing in there versus in a text message. Now, these next three pieces, when I teach grant making to folks, I go, all of these mean something and nothing. It just depends on the foundation, right? So a letter of intent could mean something very differently, but I'm going to give you kind of a broad gauge of how I see a letter of intent and what that might be. So I tend to find letters of intent come from organizations that get tons of grant applications. It's usually designed to save you time. Although I know it's another thing you have to do. So like, I hear the craziness in that statement, but it really is designed that you only have to do a page of work, right? Instead of filling out an entire grant application to make sure you have your budgets and everything, and to for the foundation to gauge whether they're interested in funding it, right? So it's usually brief, but it is another step, but it is supposed to save the majority of people time. Goes to the foundation gives you a call back. Thank you so much for applying. We would not like to see a full application, but with you all after this class, you're going to be like always getting the full application. I'm going to make you so busy, you're going to be sick. There may be a request for proposals, right? Where a foundation puts out a call. We're looking for applications that do X, Y, and Z, right? So read that thoughtfully. Be thoughtful about whether your program meets their goals, right? Not just like it came into your inbox, so they must have sent it to you on purpose. Because I've had those before where I send an email and they're like, well, it came to me. I thought for sure that meant I was eligible. And I'm like, yeah, no, we sent it to our whole list because we wanted everybody to know maybe there's a new program, blah, 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 but like be thoughtful about it. And also it doesn't mean you're a shoe-in, right? Like just because you got that RFP, which, sorry, I should have put that in parentheses because I feel like people usually say that as opposed to request for proposals. But you may have gotten it, but it doesn't mean like you're the only one, right? It could have gone to 1,000 people. Now, a foundation may also go, I'm picking on the people that I can see. Is it Karen or Karen?
Corinne.
I didn't even get it right, and I guessed twice.
I'm used to
Corinne, they're going to go, Corinne, we love the Montessori and we want you to apply, right? We're not asking everybody, we're asking the Montessori to apply. Now that should mean if you want their money, I'd be applying, right? If a foundation comes to you and if you feel comfortable with the reporting and all the things that may go with it, like they are coming and asking you to apply, that's a much better sign than just a broad RFP, right? So be cognizant that those are really two different things. And then some folks just have an application sitting on their website. They send it out to their email list, but also any Joe or Jane or Samantha or whoever can tumble in to their website and go, oh, I can apply for that, and just apply. Well, I get that all the time. So it's good to understand there's different types and how you might interact with them, Now, if you just stumble on someone, we will talk about this in November, but I'll tease it now. Do your research, right? Don't just say, here's empty blanks in an application and I will enter my data into them. We just finished a grant cycle, so I'll have some good stories for you on, without naming names. But we had that. We literally had somebody from out of state stumble upon it. They're like, oh, we meet these criteria, and just apply. And it was kind of a crazy application. And we were like, what happened? And then I talked to them and I'm like, I would have never encouraged you to apply, right? So, be thoughtful about where you're applying. It saves your time and the foundation's time, right? Like, you don't want to waste your time. You're busy. You probably do other things besides grant writing, right? So just be really thoughtful about that. Let's get into the thick of what a grant. Yeah, I see Grace laughing because now there's bubbles everywhere. The thick of what may be asked on a grant application, because to me, this is what's going to set you up for success, to really have this information at the ready. We're going to go around like a clock. I guess maybe I should have had 12 bubbles instead of 6, but we're going to start at, let's go at 2 o'clock, 1:30. Organizational information. This is your contact information, your mission, your vision, your values. It may also include your organizational budget, your finances, your board listing, sometimes with affiliations. So where do they work? Maybe where do they live? Not their home address, but they live in that community, right? If you're serving a neighborhood, serving a county, they may want that information. When a foundation asks for your contact information, be really careful about who you put in that line, right? Sometimes the foundation may ask for your executive director or president and CEO. Sometimes they may be asking for, who can I contact about this grant? Those could be 2 very different people in your organization, right? Like, there are some organizations that president and CEO barely knows that a grant has gone out the door, right? That is okay. There's nothing wrong with that, but make sure that you're giving the foundation or the funder the correct information that they're asking for, because if they make that phone call, you want it to come probably to you, unless they're asking for that executive director, because you can speak on the details of this application. I mentioned your organizational budget or financials. Be really careful on what that funder is asking for. Again, are they asking for an audit, right? They may ask for a professional audit. There may be some folks in this room that work for very small nonprofits that do not get an annual audit. That is okay, but you may not be eligible for that funding. And so if you do not have an audit, so one back step for those who may not know, an audit is 10 times more expensive than financial review, right? Or just your general internal budget and finances. So there's really good reasons why an organization might not have an annual audit. So my recommendation would be to reach out to the funder, right? Did they use the word audit because they just want your finances? Or did they put audit because they really want an annual audit? And if they really wanted an annual audit and you don't have it, that may not be a good grant for you, right? So be thoughtful about asking that question. Don't just do the rest of the application, right? This is often kind of the order that it's going to be asked in your application too. So like, if you get here, stop, call, email, reach out, and figure out what's the right answer. And have both your board list plain and with affiliations, have those both at the ready, because there's nothing worse than all of a sudden going, where does Jason work? oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. And you're like trying to figure this all out because the deadline is in 3 hours and you realized you were missing your board listing with affiliations. Then we come to kind of what I like to say are these kind of wrap up these next three: the need, solution, the measurement, and evaluation. And if you think I'm going to go that quickly, you should have learned better by now. But the way we teach this in grant making is, what did you do? How much did you do? And is anyone better off? Right? That is this section right here. Like, what is the need? What is the gap? And it's not just like, I have a feeling that if we, laid more books out on the corners, kids would find them and read them, right? Like, it's not just this weird thing that I feel like is a problem. It's, what is the need? Now, that can be both anecdotal and data driven, right? And it probably is, but data is so important, particularly if you're working with community foundations. They may be a great resource, especially after Lilly Endowment invested in all of them to do some research on their community. So if you can throw their data back at them, they will love that, right? They did all this work. They would love to see their own data used in grant applications. But there's all kinds of data out there. Indiana Youth Institute, for any of you that work with children and youth, and they allow that to be used very broadly, they will do free data research for you. And that's a statewide agency. So get to know your IYI regional rep and talk to them about their data work. They will also, maybe little known fact, depending on how much you work with them, they will also review your grants for you. If you're a youth serving organization, and go, you could probably tweak it here and here and here. And they do that for free as well. So, just like you wouldn't want somebody to send you that the night before it's due, I'm sure that there's a timeline for you to submit those to them, but they will do that. And so that's pretty powerful. So understand the need before you jump in, right? Because you are not applying for grants just to apply for grants. You're applying for grants to solve a problem that your organization is serving, right? So being really thoughtful about the need is the best place to start, because, and this is generally, I see this happen all the time. When we're asking the need, we're asking what's the community need, not like we need money, right? So every once in a while I get somebody that's like, we just really need the money. And you're like, okay, but what do you do? Like, why should we fund that? That's the need. What is the work that you're going to do with this? The solution is, how the heck are you going to meet this need? And it may be time-tested, best practice, and it may be inventive, innovative, the new way of solving an old problem. That's what one of our applicants said. We've got a new way of solving an old problem. But you need to know what your solution is, right? This is not a time to start figuring it out. You need to come to the table knowing how your organization plans to solve it. And frame the difference between, we know this is the way to solve it, or we're trying to solve it in a new way. Like, both of those are valuable, right? I know my committee loves bright, shiny objects. So new. Now, you're all hearing this, I'm sure, because I've sat on the other side before. And when I hear new, I also think expensive. It might be a new staff person. It might be all new equipment, whatever. That is okay, but I hear that. So I have to tell them when they go, well, this isn't new. And I was like, well, you only want to give $5,000. So you're not getting anything new for $5,000. You can't barely buy a new car for $5,000. Almost can't buy a new computer. So be really thoughtful about, what is your solution and why? Why is this the right way to do it? And then, whether you have done the evaluation yet or not, know how you're going to measure your success. right? So what are your plans to evaluate this? Again, be willing to build this in to your grant budget if you need to, right? Now, a funder might go, well, we only pay for programming and not evaluation. You can say they're crazy in the back of your mind. Don't say it to them, but like, know how you plan to evaluate it and understand the difference between outputs and outcomes, right? So we served 30 people. Neat. But this goes to the third question I asked you earlier. Is anyone better off? Just because 30 people came through your door, are they any better off? How do you measure whether they're better off? That's the piece that a foundation really wants to know. Everybody kind of gets stuck on the outputs line, right? It's the easiest to measure. Outcomes are super hard to measure. And some of the work you all do is long term, right? So like we get that too, but think about maybe how you could track it. Even if you could get outcomes from one or two people, you're interviewing those individuals, right? A year later, that's really valuable for your information and for the funder. So understand measurement and evaluation, have a plan ready. It doesn't mean it might not change, but have a plan ready for this. And then your grant budget and your budget narrative, right? Now, some funders are going to say, you need to use our template. If they say that, use their template, like use their template. I can't emphasize this enough. It goes back to like following the rules, like use their template. Now, for us, we ask for a grant budget and I give people a template if they want, right? And it says that, right? This is for you if you want, if you don't have a template, if you don't know, like you're welcome to use this, but you are not required, send me what you got. Like that's what I want, because my template is, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. This is about you. Oh, Sean, I wish there was a universal budget template. I wish there was a universal grant application for everybody, but you know, that's big, bold goals. You know, I tend to think that yes, a universal budget would be great, but also give me your budget. Like, just tell me what you need. That's my job, is to decipher the pieces of it. You know, as long as it's not like we just need $10,000, period. Like, well, for what would be helpful. But, you know, sometimes foundations get really stuck in the mud and they get stuck in their ivory towers and they say, no, you need to do this and then this and then this. To me, I'm like, our job is to be a partner with the nonprofits in our community. I want to make your job as easy as possible, because your job is probably not solely grant writing. Your job is probably 17 other things. And somebody said, here's a grant I need you to apply for. By the way, it's due in 2 days on a Sunday, right? And you're like, okay. You know, we have a program and a fundraiser in the next 2 days, but sure, let me jump on this. So, so I try to do that, but I will say, when it comes to your grant budget, is do your research to make sure your numbers are good. I'll give you an example. In this last grant cycle, we had 2 organizations applying for technology upgrades. 2 organizations that both, I will tell you, really need technology upgrades. And one, it was like, oh, perfectly round numbers to the nearest $1,000. And one was like to the penny. Do you know which one my committee liked the most? The one that was to the penny. And I know that's some extra work for you all, but it also shows that you know what you want, right? That you've looked at the computer and you know what a computer costs. Now, I don't. Some foundations might ask for the quotes or the invoices and all that. I don't want to nitpick what you have, but when you just drop in like requests to the nearest 1,000. I'm like, do you know what this piece of equipment even costs? You know, like, what have you done the research to really understand the costs associated with this program? And so my committee did choose to fund them both, right? So it doesn't mean that it's impossible, but it's very clear that one did some research. And when I met with them, she was like, oh, let me show you. Here's this thing. And she was sorting through all of her Best Buy printouts. I mean, they were like screenshots of the Best Buy cart, right? For her computers and recording equipment. And so it was nice to be like, oh, okay, I see where these numbers are coming from. Whereas the other one, when I met with them, they were like, well, they were estimates. You know, we were trying to come close. We think that this is what it costs. And I was like, ouch, you know, like it just didn't feel as good. And then some folks may ask for a budget narrative, because why do we just want to see your numbers when we can have you write about all your numbers? So that's the piece where you're like, here's all the, like, in words, what all these numbers mean. I will tell you, for me, I usually do kind of like a quick question. And it's like, is there something we should know about this budget? Right? Like, this is a new program. This is like, we have equipment that is like fully broken down. Like, we are not functional right now. Or when we asked last year for organizational finances, and it was the year that shall not be named. And I said, is there anything we should know about your budget from last year? You know, we got responses like, this reflects a PPP loan. This, we do a fee for service program. And we weren't running services for 6 months because we couldn't have people in our building, right? So I tend to use these as opportunities to tell the story in a succinct form. My boss, on the other hand, loves a report. And there's like a 3-page budget narrative every month to our board with the finances, right? So, you know, pay attention to what they're asking for, but also be thoughtful about how you use your language in your narrative, because, excuse me, hold on, I need to get a drink of water. Because it's an opportunity to tell more fully the story and not just reiterate the numbers, right? So that's not really what they're looking for. They want to hear why, the feeling, the passion behind the numbers. I see a question pop up. How much time do you believe your grants committee reviews the information in each grant submitted? Does every committee member reach each application, or are they divided up, or do you read the information and give a recap of the application? Great question. I will answer this. And we will talk, I promise we will talk a lot more about kind of committee work next month, right? So I'm trying to kind of gear you up to be ready, and then we'll talk about applying, but it's questions here. So I have committee members that spend hours upon hours upon hours reviewing the application, your website, your 990s at the IRS, everything. Like, they do the deepest dive and dig in. And I have committee members who read the narratives, think it's cute, and they know which one they want, right? So it's all of the above, and that's why we have a committee, right? We've got those right brain people, left brain people, we've got lawyers and accountants. I always like to have an accountant on my committee so they can look through your finances. Remember what I said, 2 + 2 is 4. That's my math, right? I don't love to crunch numbers and the math behind it. So I love to have a CPA that can help me do some of that financial review on there. And I've got an artist on my committee, right, who really comes into those meetings with her feelers up, right? She's like, this one just felt good. Like, it's the right thing to do, right? And so it depends. I hate to tell you, but it depends. For us, each one of our committee members reviews every application. But It depends. If you've met one foundation, you've met one foundation. Sometimes they're getting hundreds of applications. So they're often pairs. I'll give you an example. That is actually how the Arts Commission and the Historical Society both ran their grants programs. I also sit on the Lilly Endowment Scholarship statewide review committee. So once those programs are finished, they go up and I review to make sure that the community foundations did what they said they would do. And I'm paired off with somebody. And we review the same, 10 counties grant programs or scholarship programs. And then we work together and then we come back to the full group and make a recommendation based on that. And so it does depend. And then I think private foundations are more likely to work like your last question, where the program officer is really doing kind of the most of the work and then making recaps and recommendations to a committee or to their board. And so it all depends. So I will say that a lot. Like this section is pretty straightforward. Next month, when we're talking about all of these kind of nitty gritty, it depends on who you're dealing with, which is why it's really good to know who you're dealing with. I'm gonna bounce through attachments pretty quickly because I want to make sure we get to the tools here at the end and save time for questions. I told you I'll talk a lot. So attachments, there could be a cover letter. We don't have a cover letter, but somebody might ask for one, especially those paper applications, and a cover sheet. If you have a cover sheet, usually there's a very specific format they want for a cover sheet. So follow their format, follow the rules. Some folks may ask for an executive summary. Just a reminder, an executive summary is not new information. It is all information that's covered in your application, right? It is a summary of the rest of the information, not new information. They may ask for your IRS determination letter. Make sure you have that, like as a grant writer, have that on hand at all times. Also, if your organization is not on GuideStar, please fill out your organizational profile on GuideStar. Community foundations and other foundations really use that as a resource. And so, for instance, we don't ask for your IRS determination letter anymore. We do ask for your EIN, and we go look you up on GuideStar. And I encourage my committee to look you up on GuideStar. And the more information you have on there, the more impactful that can be, not just to funders, but to donors too. Because some of the most sophisticated donors are using GuideStar to review organizations. And then you may want some letters of support on hand, especially if you're applying to an organization or a funder that that focuses on collaboration. To have somebody saying, yes, we're collaborating with them, and not just your random list of people you've talked to in the last month, is really, really valuable. So make sure you have those, at least one kind of on deck. Okay, let's talk tools for grant success. One is quick and one is a little bit more detailed. So the grant binder. Now, I call it a grant binder because I don't know what else to call it, like a folder or a something, but somewhere where you keep all of the information we just went through in one place, right? So now it's probably on your server drive and it's a folder, but have a section with all of these pieces in it, because with all your best planning, right, there's still going to be a grant opportunity that pops up out of nowhere. And if you have all this stuff in one place, you're ready to go and can apply immediately. So your grant binder is just a place to keep all of this stuff for the programs that you're applying for. Now let's talk about a grant calendar. I am going to try to change which screen I'm sharing. Can I do that? Do I have to stop sharing? Probably. Let's show you. I'm going to show you an example, and then I'm going to send it to Margarita and the team, and so she can share a sample with you. Here we go. So your grant calendar is a way to organize all of this work, right? So get one of these set up. This is just in Excel, right? This is easy peasy. The grantor, right? This might say Hendricks County Community Foundation. Have they given you an award before? What is the program that you're applying for? The grant amount you're applying for? When is it due? Where do I submit it? How do I submit it? What is the status? Meaning we're in waiting, we have heard back, we didn't get it. And you can start tracking all of your potential grantors for the year. You may only have one in each one of these categories or not a lot. It's a good way to organize this. In turn, also, how about the ones you have submitted? What happened? This is great for when your boss says, well, what have you been working on for the last month? And you're like, well, let me show you. Thank you very much. All these grants. And we got 2 of them. Right? So, and even pieces like, oops, sorry, I went too far. A thank you. We did send them a thank you, right? We did follow up. And then I love this. This was a new piece that I'd seen. It's called the dead list. HCCF does not fund in Noble County. Okay, they're off the list. So not only does this help you remember that, but when the new you comes in and they're like, I wonder if we should apply to the Hendricks County Community Foundation. And they pull up Grace's template and they go, nope, Grace already found them. They only fund in Hendricks County. Moving on. Don't even have to spend any time on it. So this can be a really great resource and help keep you on track. Now you can use an Excel document. Some people I know use Salesforce. You may have a system at the office that you can use. I love Trello, which is a project management program that you can use for free. And it also connects to your calendar, your Outlook calendar, which I love. So it's totally up to you, whatever works for you. You may be a paper and pen kind of person, and you have a year planner that you're using. But find a way to track this for yourself and for the next you, because that's going to be really, really helpful. So I got done in 57 minutes. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm happy to hang out. I will see you all in a month. So, I'll be back. And I will send this kind of template that I found to Margarita so she can share it with you if that's valuable.
Thank you, Eric. That was some valuable information. Does anybody have any questions for Eric? Wonderful, wonderful. So the next time we meet will be November 11th. In a couple of weeks, you should be getting the link to that meeting. And a little later, you'll get the slides for that meeting as well. Today, after the meeting, you'll get the recording of this meeting and the survey evaluation about the meeting. We like to see those because we use those to for the next series as we're planning and things like that. So I'm looking forward to November 11th. The other meeting for this quarter will be on December 9th, and that one will be a panel discussion. So you'll be able to talk to some grant writers, some local grant writers, some local foundation funders and things like that, so that you can ask your questions directly to them. So we are glad that you will be joining us November 11th and December 9th. That is all we have for today, and I appreciate your time. So